The signal came at 3:19 Coordinated Earth time, an anomaly tucked deep within the Perseus arm, faint, structured, repeating. Not natural, not human. Within 12 hours, the United Earth Alliance had scrambled the Argonaut, a deep space diplomatic vessel built for first contact. By hour 16, it was gone. No distress signal, no escape pods, just a burst of static and silence. Then came the ships. Massive, obsidian-colored vessels emerged from deep void space, their hulls etched with impossible geometries. They hovered above Earth like watching gods. One hailed. The transmission was incomprehensible, half sermon, half decree. A voice thundered in a dozen languages, all twisted by theological gravitas. Heretics. Blasphemers. Your world violates sacred ordinance. The Lorithian Ascendancy shall cleanse you. And then they opened fire. In the skies over Shanghai, defensive satellites disintegrated in white-hot arcs. Over Paris, kinetic rods dropped from orbit split the city like kindling. In North America, the Denver arcology burned, its fusion core detonating beneath layers of earth and steel. The assault was precise, almost ritualistic. No demands, no surrender, only judgment. Earth's militaries, fractured by decades of uneasy peace, mounted a futile defense. Fighter swarms fell to Lorithian interceptors that moved like thought. Supercarriers vanished in luminous rifts. Even nuclear salvos failed, intercepted or swallowed by strange, pulsing barriers. Within 48 hours, half of Earth's population was dead. The rest scattered. In the ruins, survivors gathered like dust in the wind. Beneath Johannesburg, a dig team turned bomb shelter into a makeshift commune. In the jungles of Brazil, eco-settlements activated ancient fallback protocols. A research outpost on Luna transmitted coordinates before it, too, went dark. One by one, Earth's lights blinked out, not into oblivion, but into silence. Not extinction, but exile. Amid the ashes, a woman named Kaylin Voss stood in what was once Geneva, now nothing but cracked glass and scorched steel. She had been a cultural attaché, fluent in diplomacy, not survival. Yet her voice crackled through an old comm line, patched and rusted. This isn't the end. We adapt. We endure. We make myth from fire. Elsewhere in the Oort cloud, the Ishvara's hand coasted silent. It had been humanity's first interstellar prototype, slow, inefficient, outdated before it ever left Sol. But now it became sanctuary. Aboard, an AI named Athene processed the Lorithian transmissions and offered a hypothesis. They are not merely conquerors. They are zealots. The Ascendancy believes itself the divine order of the galaxy. We, by virtue of our independence, our chaos, our anathema. In the black, understanding bloomed like flame. The Lorithians, meanwhile, moved with divine purpose. Their religion, Ordo Veritas, taught that the galaxy was a lattice of sacred harmonies. Every species allotted a role in divine design. Humanity, with its unpredictable growth and boundary-shattering technology, was a flaw, a mutation, heresy incarnate. Their cleansing war was not conquest. It was purification. Still, not all Lorithians agreed. Hytherge Kalmareth, a war cleric of House Veruin, stood at the balcony of a shattered temple on Mars. He had overseen the eradication of 3 megacities. But something gnawed at his faith. Rumors from the front lines, whispers of humans surviving, adapting, even fighting back. He spoke to his scribe quietly. They should be ashes. Why do I see embers? In the asteroid belt, a pirate-turned-refugee named Thad Rourke hijacked a Lorithian scout craft with nothing but jury-rigged plasma torches and suicidal courage. The data he retrieved showed schematics, fleet paths, weaknesses. For the first time, humans saw the enemy's blood, not divine, but machine and bone. And in the Pacific Trench, the Leviathan Vault, once a myth, a Cold War relic, hummed to life. Automated systems awakened old war machines, nuclear-tipped drones, stealth subs long thought scrapped. The ocean itself, once choked by decay, became a fortress. Humanity had been knocked to its knees, but now began a crawl. Messages traveled between secret satellites and dead drops, scattered whispers, desperate plans. A name began to echo across the remnants of human communication channels. Ash Concord. No nation, no flag. Just an idea. Unity born of ruin. Kalen Voss and Thad Rourke eventually met on a derelict mining colony near Phobos, where an uneasy alliance was formed. Old rivals shook hands. Former enemies now shared breath and water. We are not the architects of apocalypse, Voss said, but we will become its reckoning. On the other side of the galaxy, the Lorithian Ascendancy praised its own triumph. Worlds were consecrated. The purging of Terra was written into scripture. Statues were erected in honor of the god fleet's divine precision. But some among them began to question the ease of it all. Why had the heretics fallen so swiftly? Why did divine order feel so hollow? Kalmareth, now stationed on the edges of Lorithian territory, received a message not meant for him. An intercepted human transmission, raw and defiant. We are still here. Kalen Voss sat beneath a fractured dome of glass and carbon, deep in what had once been Geneva's subterranean transit hub. Above her, scorched steel beams twisted like the ribs of some great, ancient beast. Below, in the choking dust and artificial torchlight, survivors whispered prayers, not to gods, but to machines, lost friends, or the distant memory of sunlight. She wasn't a soldier, not in any traditional sense. Her experience came from boardrooms and cultural conferences, not battlefield tactics. But that world had burned with the cities, and what rose from its ashes needed something different. Something raw, adaptable, impossible to predict. Something very human. The Ash Concord hadn't started with a battle. It had started with a promise, a spoken vow broadcast over scavenged satellites and decrypted Lorithian tech. Kalen's voice had been the first. Others followed. Survivors from Santiago, Lagos, the ruins of Los Angeles. Refugees from Mars, the Europa vaults, even the shattered arcologies of Ganymede. They didn't agree on everything. Many didn't agree on anything. But they shared a simple truth. Survival wasn't enough anymore. On the edge of the solar system, the Ishvara's hand drifted cold and silent, its crew of 32 living like ghosts in the metal corridors. Thad Rourke paced the narrow walkway outside the ship's primary AI core, chewing dried protein strips and muttering to himself. Athene's voice cracked through the intercoms, her tone calm, clinical, curious. You pace when you're processing existential decisions. Statistically, pacing has no effect on cognitive clarity. Thanks, Doc, Rourke grunted. Next you'll tell me I'm sleep-deprived. You are. By 41 hours. He grunted again and stopped beside a console lit with Lorithian glyphs, scanned and cracked by Athene's black box linguistics engine. This wasn't just data. This was insight, patterns of fleet movements, ritual timing, hierarchies in their religious military structure. It's not just a war, he muttered. It's a crusade, with rhythms, predictable rhythms. He leaned over the console and input a sequence. A hologram sparked to life. One of the massive Lorithian battleships, framed by a swirl of celestial bodies and pulse lines. Rourke squinted at the design. Even gods have blind spots, he murmured. Far from Sol, the rogue Lorithian scholar Narelshaw moved through a deep space reliquary orbiting a long-dead sun. Once a keeper of the great codices, she had fled the Ascendancy after the fall of Earth. The things she had seen, the burning of cities, the cries of infants twisted by gravitational anomalies, had cracked something in her. Now, she studied forbidden heresies. One such heresy, that the divine lattice could evolve. Among the dead relics of her people's religion, she found something strange, snippets of human communication captured in fragmented broadcast packets. Music, poetry, a Shakespeare quote, translated and retranslated until it became alien scripture. To thine own self be true, she whispered, and it must follow as the night, the day. She shuddered. The idea was dangerous. Choice was dangerous, but she couldn't look away. The humans were more than aberrations. They were a test. a mirror held to the Ascendancy's soul. By the third year after the invasion, humanity's survivors had gone from isolated cells to a scattered web. Still fractured, still outgunned, but no longer alone. Kalen and Thad's transmissions reached deep into contested space. A Lorithian scouting vessel went dark near the asteroid belt. When a second went to investigate, it found a message scorched into an ice-locked rock. We remember. We return. These weren't random attacks. They were probes, warnings, like tremors before a quake. Kalen's group, now calling themselves the Ember Ring, began forging alliances with non-human outcasts and rogue AI constructs. Using salvaged tech and mythologized Earth legends, they created new symbols, part propaganda, part belief system. It wasn't just for show. They needed unity, and unity needed myth. One of their earliest creations was a sigil, a black phoenix rising from a ring of fire, flanked by stars. It was painted on drones, helmets, the walls of every hideout. Beneath it, the words Ash Concord. It wasn't a nation. It wasn't even an army. It was a story, and stories, Kalen knew, were what empires feared most. In a cryo vault under the Pacific, old-world weapons came online. Drone submarines with smart minds, deep-sea missile platforms from a lost century, and buried mech that hadn't seen sunlight since before orbital law forbade them. These were relics, but Kalen's team knew how to wake ghosts. Athene assisted from orbit, uploading fragments of Lorithian code into their systems, transforming ancient Earth weaponry into something more, half machine, half mimicry of divine tech. They weren't ready for war, but they were no longer running. Then came the turning point. In the belt, the Ember Ring staged its first major operation, Operation Stonewake. The objective? Seize a Lorithian data node embedded in a comet-based monastery. It wasn't just storage, it was sacred, guarded by cleric wardens and automated psionic defenses. A Concord strike team, humans and defectors, assaulted it using retrofitted mining vessels and stealth tech built from jury-rigged plasma dampeners. They cut through ritual defenses, bypassed prayer field barriers, and downloaded thousands of gigabytes of Ascendancy strategic data. They left one thing behind, a black phoenix sigil carved into the altar. The response was furious. Entire sectors went on high alert. Lorithian propaganda declared it an act of desecration. Priests screamed sermons on dozens of worlds. But something had changed. The Concord wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a name. Back on Earth, Kalen Voss stood atop the crumbling Geneva shelter, staring out at a sky forever tainted with ash and satellites. She pressed a hand to the radio mic on her chest and said the words that would soon be replayed across colonies and forgotten stations alike. We are the children of ruin, the exiles of fire, the broken, but not defeated. Not yet. This is the Ash Concord, and we are coming home. The Crescent of Zarn, a Lorithian archive world carved into the shell of a fractured moon, floated in solemn silence at the edge of the Delphine Rift. It was not a military target, not in the traditional sense. No fleets patrolled its perimeter, no orbital guns ringed its crust. Its defenses were spiritual, sacred, symbolic, which made it perfect for a strike. Inside the Ember Ring's war room, buried beneath Europa's methane ice crust, Kalen Voss studied the holomap, her fingers flicking across a Lorithian orbital scan. This is where they store cultural doctrine, she said, voice calm, clipped. Religious manifestos. History. Prophecies. Fleet patterns encoded in scripture. It's not just data, it's belief. Thad Rourke leaned over the display, chewing on the end of a broken stylus. You're not just looking to hit their logistics. You're looking to hit their soul. Kalen didn't look up. If they believe we're heretics, then let's give them a crisis of faith. The strike team was a patchwork of humanity's last warriors and alien defectors. Volunteers who had seen the inside of Lorithian purification camps, or whose worlds had been corrected by divine fire. The mission would be short, loud, and precise. They called it Operation Wormglass. The Concord used a salvaged mining rig, the Sable Widow, disguised as a derelict or hauler. Powered by repurposed fusion coils and cloaked in dust from shattered comets, It drifted toward the archive moon like a forgotten piece of space trash. On board, Kaelin tightened the buckles of her rebreather. Rourke passed her a matte black shard, a Lorithian communion crystal. If this goes sideways, he said, jam that into any uplink. Athene can trigger a full data burn remotely. Kaelin smirked. Let's hope I live long enough to shove it somewhere sacred. The landing was clean. The monastery's outer wards had grown complacent, its guardians focused inward. After all, who would dare strike a world devoted to holy knowledge? The team moved fast, through obsidian hallways carved with sacred texts, beneath crystal-lace ceilings that shimmered with ambient prayer frequencies. A psionic drone blinked into view. Rourke dropped it with a custom EMP dart before it could raise an alarm. They breached the sanctum within 24 minutes. It wasn't what they expected. The heart of the archive was alive. Tendrils of bioorganic wiring pulsed with faint light. Lorithian thought flesh, a living neural lattice designed to feel as much as store. It whispered ancient liturgies as they passed. Athene's voice buzzed over comms, initiating partial uplink. Disregard spiritual content. It is non-lethal. Kaelin stared into the writhing code flesh, transfixed by its beauty. You think like a machine. This isn't just memory, Athene. This is identity, which is why we must fracture it. Athene replied coldly. Rourke jammed the shard into the uplink. Data flowed, scripts, star charts, commandment-laced stratagems, theological combat routines. But even as it downloaded, Kaelin saw something else, dreams, visions. She felt the memory of a Lorithian child watching their world burn, of prayers answered with silence, of generals who wept before issuing judgment. The Ascendancy wasn't monolithic. It was fractured, cracked, human. Time to go, Rourke barked. They left behind more than wreckage. Kaelin, at the last moment, planted a symbol in the archive's central altar, burned into the stone with thermite, the Ash Concord sigil. Within hours, the Ascendancy's holy networks were in chaos. Doctrinal purity was compromised. Entire sermons went dark. Worse still, some lower-ranking urges, priests trained in both scripture and command, began to question how the heretics had bypassed divine protection. One of them was High Thurge Kalmareth. He stood in his private sanctum aboard the dreadnought Veil Corps, reviewing footage leaked from the strike. He saw the human team move like phantoms. He saw the sigil. More importantly, he felt something, not anger, not vengeance, but awe. They are not anomalies, he said softly. They are insurgent divinities. His adjutant, a fanatical priest named Orectal, hissed, "Do not blaspheme. They are nothing." Kalmareth turned slowly. They are becoming something that is more dangerous than nothing. While the Ascendancy reeled, the Ash Concord pressed the advantage. Strike cells activated in half a dozen systems. Fuel depots vanished in solar flares. Priestly data spires were flooded with viral scripture. Earth poetry rewritten in Lorithian syntax, blending chaos and divinity. The Concord's myth-making kicked into overdrive. Kaelin authorized a psychological warfare division, the Scribes of Ash. They spread stories like wildfire, of a human child surviving a cleansing and taming a Lorithian war beast, of Concord saboteurs walking unharmed through prayer fields, of the fire speaker, a half-mythical warrior said to wield a blade that melted belief. Rourke thought it was all nonsense, until a rebel ship was granted safe passage by a Lorithian patrol. They said the stars told them to let us go. The pilot reported, stunned, said we were part of prophecy. Meanwhile, deep within the Ascendancy's theological databanks, something stirred. A subset of ancient prophecy, buried beneath 1,000 years of spiritual bureaucracy, reawakened. It spoke of a shadow refrain, a cycle where divine order would be tested by flame-born heretics, whose adaptability would echo the gods themselves. It had always been dismissed as metaphor. Until now, Kalmareth read it in silence. Then he did the unthinkable. He copied it to an off-grid storage node and began to consider. 3 weeks after the Wormglass raid, the Ascendancy launched a retaliation campaign across the Vega Verge. But their strategy had become predictable, their sermons robotic, their movements ritualistic. The Concord adapted faster. They planted false prophecies, redirected fleets into ambushes, weaponized belief. What had once been a scattered rebellion was now a war of ideologies. Myth against doctrine, chaos against order. And for the first time, the Lorithians couldn't tell where human strategy ended and divine interference began. In a quiet chamber aboard the Ishvara's hand, Kaelin stood alone with a fragment of the archive. She stared into the alien interface, watching 1,000 years of religious history scroll past. "I don't want to destroy them," she said aloud. "I want them to see." Athene responded softly. "Then we will show them. But first, they must bleed." Kaelin didn't flinch, because in the fires of rebellion, humanity had found its truth. They were not the broken. They were the spark. The campaign began in silence. No declarations. No grand overtures. Just flickers in the dark. Ships disappearing. Comm relays going dead. Worlds waking to find their Lorithian governors assassinated in their sanctums. It was precise, swift, and unpredictable. They called it the Spiral. Kaelin Voss stood on the bridge of the Revenant, a retrofitted Lorithian frigate now painted with jagged red sigils. Half war paint, half psychological warfare. Her eyes scanned the holomap as one world after another flickered red, then gold. "Taken. Liberated. Sector 15 complete," said Lieutenant Osei, a former Earthfleet captain who now wore scrap metal as ceremonial armor. "Minimal losses. Civilian casualties under 1.2%. Local resistance has already pledged support." Kaelin nodded. "Tell the scribes to seed spiral myths there. Fireborn rebirth, Phoenix in the dust, all of it. Make them feel it." The Spiral wasn't just a military campaign. It was cultural insurgency. It moved fast, faster than the Ascendancy could predict. That was the point. The Lorithians operated on divine rhythm, battle strategies and troop deployments governed by ritual, prayer, and prophecy. But the Ash Concord broke the rhythm, turned it sideways, inverted it. They struck during sacred observances when Lorithian forces were fasting or in temple. They mimicked divine omens with signal jammers and solar flares. They even dropped leaflets made of programmable carbon films that morphed into shifting symbols, each representing an Earth myth, reimagined through Lorithian eyes. The Spiral wasn't just winning. It was rewriting belief. On the Ascendancy homeworld of the Rose Prime, the High Synod gathered for crisis deliberations inside the celestial halls of order. 1,000 robed figures, some in ivory, others in obsidian, all bathed in the golden light of orbiting prayer orbs. Kalmareth, once an enforcer of divine law, now stood at the edge of the chamber, silent, watching. The council speaker, Virex Toll, slammed his staff of concordance on the floor. "They've taken 8 shrine worlds. They've desecrated the archive of Emolite. And now they speak our language in mockery of divine scripture." An elder war cleric growled, "They are but vermin in stolen flesh. Strike harder. Crush them beneath judgment." But Kalmareth stepped forward. "They are not vermin. They are mutation, evolution. And mutation spreads." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some drew back as if scorched. "You would praise the heretics?" Virex Tool barked. "No," Kalmareth said, eyes steady. "I fear them, because I begin to understand them." He held aloft a Concord transmission, retranslated by a loyal acolyte. It was a fragment of Earth poetry weaponized into prophecy. "We are the fire in your future, the spark your gods forgot. We do not ask for thrones or temples. We burn and rise." In the Spiral's wake, uprisings broke out on over a dozen Lorithian-controlled worlds. Alien species once considered lesser by the divine hierarchy saw humans using Earth myth as a call to rebellion and joined them. On the jungle world of Kruin, a Lorithian governor was overthrown by local tribes who wore human masks and sang old Terran war chants. On Rax, 9, a gas giant cloud mines rebelled after Concord operatives dropped a holodrama rewritten from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Within a week, they were fighting under the banner of the Ash Ascendant, a spiral-aligned sub-faction. Even parts of the Ascendancy's own population began to whisper. Not of surrender, but of doubt. Rourke led a strike force on Valith, a forge moon responsible for crafting psionic war spears and sanctified plating. They used stolen Lorithian blessing codes to bypass the orbital guards, dropping into the factory's heart with fusion charges and neural disruptors. But something went wrong. Half the team was cut down by auto-priests, machines sanctified with combat liturgy. Rourke barely escaped, bloodied and limping, dragging a wounded comrade back through the wreckage. They detonated the charges just as the forge began chanting an old prayer. Rourke, coughing through ash and smoke, muttered, "That's the last time I sneak into a god's basement." Athene, ever clinical, replied through his earpiece. The losses were within acceptable variance. But Rourke's face twisted. Tell that to Kovic. He didn't sign up to be a variable. Kalen later found him in the med bay, staring at a relic he'd pulled from the wreckage. A scorched Lorithian icon of a twin-headed serpent, eyes weeping fire. She was holding it when she died, he muttered. Like it meant something. Kalen sat beside him, quiet, because she knew it did. The spiral moved too fast for the Ascendancy's theology to react. They needed visions. They needed rituals. They needed time. The Concord gave them none. Even Lorithian AIs, some older than human civilization, began to falter. Their logic coils, bound by religious programming, could not adapt to the erratic tempo of spiral operations. And still the story spread. The fire speaker. The blade that doubts. The Concord saints. No one knew if they were real. But real didn't matter anymore. Belief did. On the moons of Yennevar, a young Concord agent named Imra lit a pyre in the ruins of a fallen Lorithian temple. Around her, a dozen former slaves, alien and human, watched as she raised a black phoenix banner. "This is not a war," she said. "This is a resurrection." By the 7th week, the Ascendancy's inner sectors began to crack. Supply lines bent. Subordinates hesitated. Theurgy units argued among themselves. And on the Rose Prime, Kalmareth stood before the High Synod one last time. "I offer a choice," he said, laying down his war staff. "Negotiate, not out of weakness, but survival, or this spiral will burn straight to your gods." He was branded a heretic that day, but not executed, because in the darkness behind the golden thrones, some had already begun to whisper his words. Back aboard the Revenant, Kalen received a transmission she didn't expect. It wasn't coordinates. It wasn't intelligence. It was a request. "We are not your enemy. We question the order. Let's meet. Let's speak. Before the spiral consumes us all." Kalen stared at the message for a long time. Then she whispered, "It begins." Because the spiral was never about fire. It was about transformation. The meeting was arranged with an odd sense of urgency, at least as urgent as the Ascendancy could manage. For centuries, the Lorithians had ruled with cold precision, their world a perfect reflection of divine order. No one had dared to question their beliefs. Until now, Kalen Voss stared at the transmission on her console, fingers hovering over the controls. The message had been cryptic, but its intent was clear. The Ascendancy was offering a meeting. Not a surrender. Not a truce. A negotiation. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had thought that the spiral, the lightning-fast, unrelenting wave of Concord strikes, had broken their enemies. The Lorithians had crumbled under the pressure. Their fleet, their sacred temples, their mighty walls of belief, each one had been tested, torn asunder, and now, an emissary from the heart of the Empire was asking for dialogue. But what were they really asking for? She sat in the command chair of the Revenant, her eyes narrowing. Athene analyzed this request. Full background checks on the sender. "We need to know if this is a trap or an opportunity." The ship's AI word to life. "Understood, Kalen. Preliminary data suggests a direct request from High Thurge Kalmareth, former commander of Divine Order. Sentiment analysis indicates fear and hope. A dangerous combination." Rourke, leaning over her shoulder, snorted. "Kalmareth? I've seen his name on the kill lists. If he's asking for a meeting, it's probably to deliver a full-blown god's wrath in a pretty package." Kalen didn't respond immediately. Kalmareth had been one of the most ruthless enforcers of Lorithian doctrine, a figure known for his unwavering belief in the purity of the Ascendancy's divine mission. If he was now reaching out, it meant the Empire had been shaken to its core. This wasn't just the surrender of a general. It was the collapse of their entire foundation. "We need more than hope," Kalen finally said. "We need a reason to believe that this isn't just another Lorithian trap." The meeting was set on an asteroid station in the middle of the Carcass Belt, a neutral location far from either side's territory, where neither party could easily bring overwhelming force. But even as Kalen and her most trusted officers boarded the diplomatic ship, the weight of history hung heavy in the air. The Ascendancy had crushed worlds, decimated civilizations, and imposed their iron will on countless species. Could they really be negotiating for peace? Or was this just another phase in their strategy? When they arrived, Kalmareth was waiting, dressed not in military regalia, but in the robes of a defrocked priest. His once imposing presence now seemed hollow, a shadow of the man he had once been. His eyes, once bright with the fire of zealotry, now appeared tired, distant, as though he had seen the future and could not reconcile it with his beliefs. "We are here," Kalen said, stepping onto the observation deck, the Revenant crew fanning out behind her. Kalmareth greeted them with a formal bow, but his gaze never left Kalen. It was a look of something between curiosity and regret. "I knew it would come to this," Kalmareth said, his voice soft, almost sad. "The spiral. It was always meant to be. An evolution, not just of warfare, but of faith. Your people, you, have shaken the foundations of everything we have believed." Kalen crossed her arms, watching him closely. "You've come to talk about surrender, then?" Kalmareth shook his head. "No, this is not about surrender. It's about survival. The Ascendancy is fracturing, not from without, but from within. I fear that if this war continues, both of our civilizations will fall. We're winning. You're losing," Rourke said, stepping forward, his hand resting on the grip of his plasma pistol. "What makes you think we'd even consider peace?" Kalmareth turned to him with an expression that wasn't anger, just the barest hint of resignation. "You're not winning. You're surviving. There's a difference." He gestured to the stars outside the observation deck, the vast emptiness of space stretching before them. "Look at this. Look at what the Ascendancy has built. We have created order from chaos, structure from anarchy. But we're no longer gods. We're simply rulers who have lost their way." Kalen felt a flicker of something, compassion, maybe, or pity. The same thing that had once driven her people to overthrow their own empires, to fight against control and oppression. The same thing that had driven them to adapt, to grow in the ashes of their world. "You're asking for forgiveness, then?" Kalen said quietly. "Is that what this is about?" Kalmareth paused, his eyes darting to the floor. He didn't answer immediately, but when he did, it was almost a whisper. "I'm asking for a chance," he said. "A chance to reshape the Ascendancy. Not from within our old structures, not with the same divine laws that bound us, but with your help, with your vision. I have seen your people, Kalen. I have seen how you adapt. You do not bend to fate. You make it bend to you." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over them. The gods of the Lorithian Ascendancy had ruled with an iron fist. But here was Kalmareth, asking for help, not to destroy, but to rebuild. Was this desperation? Or was it the dawning of a new era? Rourke looked to Kalen, his face betraying a mix of skepticism and intrigue. "You're going to listen to this? After everything they've done to us? After Earth? We've all lost something," Kalen said, her voice firm. "But revenge isn't why we fight. It's survival. And survival means we rebuild, even if it means working with the enemy." Rourke growled, but he said nothing more. Kalmareth moved closer to Kalen. "I offer you something more than peace. I offer you a seat at the table, a chance to shape the future of the Ascendancy. We have the might. You have the vision. Together, we could build an empire unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. A new order." Kalen didn't speak right away. She could feel the weight of his words, the temptation of power that lay beneath them. The Lorithians had always seen themselves as the divine rulers of the galaxy. And now, Kalmareth was asking her to help reshape that order, to tear it down and rebuild it from the ground up, using human ingenuity and Lorithian might. The thought was intoxicating, but she wasn't sure if the Ascendancy could change. And she wasn't sure that she wanted to be the one to reshape it. "We'll consider your offer," Kaelin said finally. "But know this, Kalmareth, if you're lying, if this is just another trap, then we will burn everything to the ground." Kalmareth nodded, the slightest flicker of respect in his eyes. "Understand, but I will not lie to you. I am here because I believe this is the only way forward. For both our peoples." The meeting ended with no formal agreement, but with something far more dangerous, a tentative truce. Kalmareth returned to his ship, leaving the Concord crew to ponder the implications of his words. Would the Lorithians truly be willing to rebuild their empire? Or had they simply found a new way to control the galaxy? Kaelin stared out at the stars, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. For the first time since the invasion, the fate of the galaxy seemed uncertain. But that uncertainty was something new, a glimmer of hope, a possibility. And in that hope, Kaelin saw the future. It began, not with warships or speeches, but with silence. A week after the truce, the fighting stopped. Across the shattered fringes of the Ascendancy, Lorithian ships held their positions. No purification strikes, no retaliation, just radio silence and the uneasy hum of void space. Kaelin Voss sat in the Revenant's meditation chamber, formerly a Lorithian shrine, now stripped bare save for a flickering earth candle and a hollow crystal projecting the Ash Concord sigil. She had not slept in over 30 hours, not from fear, but from anticipation. Since Kalmareth's proposal, Concord leadership had split down the middle. Half saw it as a trap, the other half a new beginning. What unsettled Kaelin the most, though, wasn't the politics. It was the way the Lorithians were changing. On Tyr Kale, a minor Lorithian moon once used for scriptural indoctrination, a mural appeared overnight. Painted in mineral-rich dust and glowing with ultraviolet inks, it depicted a figure in black armor walking through fire. In one hand, a broken Lorithian prayer staff. In the other, a seedling. No one claimed responsibility. By morning, temple acolytes were bowing before it. In the city ruins of Earth's Mediterranean cradle, where once Alexandria had stood, Concord agents uncovered a vault of ancient texts, human myths long erased in the fires of the invasion. They began translating them, not into Earth dialects, but into Viritin, the sacred Lorithian tongue. Athene assisted, weaving Earth fables with Lorithian cadence, reframing chaos as divinely ordained trial by fire. It wasn't just diplomacy, it was alchemy. Scriptures once used to justify genocide now became conduits for synthesis. Kalmareth became an unlikely bridge between two worlds. His sermons, once fire and brimstone declarations of human unworthiness, had transformed into something else entirely. Not quite heresy, not quite reformation. He called it reconciliation doctrine. The divine lattice, he proclaimed, was never meant to remain static. Humanity is not its enemy. They are its catalyst, the spark that tempers the sacred into something stronger. The Ascendancy didn't know what to do with him. He was too respected to execute, too dangerous to ignore. On the battlefield, Lorithian urges began to defect, not out of loyalty to the Concord, but to this new doctrine. Some painted their armor in half gold, half black, representing balance between chaos and order. Others began incorporating human stories into their rituals. The scribes of Ash capitalized immediately. Concord Hollow broadcasts began showing images of Lorithian clerics reciting fragments of Beowulf beside their own legends. The fire speaker myth, once dismissed even by Concord command as propaganda, was now a part of Ascendancy prayers. Rourke wasn't buying it. He stood in the upper hangar, arms crossed, watching a Lorithian initiate kneel before an Earth prayer flag stitched from ship canvas and blood-soaked rags. "They're rewriting themselves because they lost," he muttered. "This isn't faith. It's survival." Kalen stood beside him. Maybe it doesn't matter. Myth is just a tool. And belief is how you use it. He looked at her, searching for the fire she'd had when they first met. But it wasn't gone. It had just evolved. So what are we, then? He asked. Liberators? Or the next empire? Kalen didn't answer. Because that was the question, wasn't it? In the shadow of the Concord's growing influence, fractures within the Ascendancy deepened. Conservative houses refused to accept Kalmarith's teachings. Some called for second purging. Others quietly began reshaping their own theologies, integrating earth elements without announcing it. On Sidrakar, a holy world considered unassailable, Concord diplomats were invited to a sermon. It wasn't a trick. They were greeted with a procession of priests bearing earth-made relics, a rusted Apollo medallion, a Bible burned at the edges, a battered UN flag, each one placed on the altar as offerings. The attending priest, Orenthal, offered a single sentence. Your myths carry fire. Ours carry form. Together, they make light. But peace was fragile. Not everyone believed in reconciliation. A radical faction within the Ascendancy, the Unbroken Lattice, staged an attack on a Concord outpost near Vega V. Dozens dead. Survivors crucified in the old Lorithian style. Messages carved into walls and blood. Divine order does not bargain with blasphemy. Kalen addressed the attack personally in a secure message to Kalmarith. This was your war. You asked for peace. Now show me your control. Kalmarith's response was cold and immediate. The Unbroken Lattice's base of operations was erased in a surgical orbital strike. No sermons, no trial, just fire. As time passed, a new structure began to form. A council, forged from Concord strategists and Lorithian scholars, where both voices had equal weight. It was called the Ash Tribunal. Not quite a government, not quite a religion, but a place where belief and policy could meet without domination. Kalen was elected as one of its first speakers. She didn't want the title, but she took it because someone had to. In her first address, she said, "We're not gods. We're not pure. We are the inheritors of ruin. We climb from ash not to rule, but to reshape. This peace is not perfect, but it is ours." In the deepest recesses of Concord-controlled space, a new signal was sent, encrypted in both human code and Viritan scripture. An invitation to rebuild together. And across the fractured galaxy, responses began to come. Back in the temple ship Halcyon Reverie, where prayers once ignited warheads and faith-fired lasers, a child, half human, half Lorithian, was born beneath the glow of twin star maps. No one spoke. Instead, they watched as the child was wrapped in flame-colored robes and placed at the altar of a hybrid shrine, one inscribed with earth steel and Lorithian crystal. A whisper passed through the chamber. Ashborn, not heretic, not conqueror, but something new. The final ceremony was held on the Rose Prime, once the impenetrable capital of the Lorithian Ascendancy, now the seat of something new, something not quite empire, not quite rebellion, something in between. The Ash Concord. Kalen Voss stood atop the high steps of the Temple of Echoes, looking down at the vast crowd below. Tens of thousands, human, Lorithian, and other species once caught in the crossfire, had gathered in the Square of Atonement. The name hadn't been changed. It didn't need to be. It had been transformed. The temple had once stood as a monument to unyielding divine hierarchy. Now its walls bore twin inscriptions, one in Earth's ancient Latin, Ex Cinera Resurgimus, and the other in sacred Viritan script, from ash light. Kalen adjusted the black sash around her shoulders, fingers brushing over the sigil embroidered at its heart, the phoenix surrounded by fractured stars. A Concord emissary stepped beside her. "They're ready." She didn't respond right away. Her eyes wandered the skyline, Lorithian architecture rising like carved stone prayers, now scattered with new designs. Clean, sharp human edges. Organic curves from allied species. Signs of a future still forming. Not long ago, all this had been ash. Now it was becoming. The road here hadn't been clean. It had been jagged, bloodied, full of whispered betrayals and brutal decisions. After the Ash Tribunal had been formed, The integration of Lorithian and Concord forces proved more dangerous than war itself. Doctrinal disputes turned to skirmishes. Old guards refused to step down. Some Concord generals, like Rourke, had pushed for immediate dismantling of all Lorithian systems. Kalen had overruled them. "We don't destroy what we can remake," she'd said. Not all agreed. Some left. Some died, trying to prove her wrong. But the Ash Concord held, because the war had made survivors, not idealists. And survivors know how to build. Kalmareth had withdrawn from public view after the tribunal was founded. He refused all titles, declined every offer of power. Some believed he was still guiding the new order from the shadows. Others claimed he'd gone into exile. Kalen knew the truth. He had returned to a broken shrine in the Halo Verge, alone, to rebuild it stone by stone. Not as a god, but as a man trying to atone. The Ash Concord grew from unlikely foundations. It wasn't a unified species or even a political structure in the traditional sense. It was a mythos, forged from trauma and triumph, and shaped into something self-sustaining. Its charter was short, barely a page. No hierarchy, only the tribunal. Rotating voices, equal weight. No gods, only stories. No empire, only stewardship. Kalen had expected resistance. She had expected another war. But instead, something strange happened. The galaxy began to breathe. Sectors once divided by fire and doctrine opened trade lanes. Forgotten species returned from exile. Lorithian shrine worlds welcomed human scholars. Earth's surviving enclaves, once buried deep beneath radioactive ash, were uncovered, repopulate, remembered, and the stories kept spreading. On the colony moon Care Ithra, a generation of children born after the Spiral War played in a garden carved from repurposed ship plating. They wore phoenix pendants, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. They didn't see each other as alien. They saw each other as Ashborn. Rourke, older now, with streaks of gray in his hair and a prosthetic leg from a long-forgotten raid, stood in the Hall of Flamekeepers on Vyrek Station. He had taken no rank in the tribunal, but his stories had become required reading in Concord academies. He still grumbled at the attention, but in quiet moments, he smiled at the thought of a galaxy where kids didn't have to learn war first. Athene, now integrated into the Concord's living infrastructure, became more than an AI. She became a custodian. Not a ruler, not an oracle, just a guide, updated continuously by real people. No one controlled her. No one worshipped her. But when disputes arose, her voice was one of the first called. A ghost of humanity's recklessness, now tempered by the galaxy's hard-earned wisdom. And Kalen? She never called herself a ruler. She refused titles. She refused monuments. She walked among the rebuilt worlds quietly, speaking where needed, withdrawing when her shadow became too long. But her presence carried weight, not because she demanded loyalty, but because people believed in what she had helped forge. A myth, yes, but a true one. As the twin suns of the Rose Prime dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in crimson and violet hues, Kalen stepped forward at the Temple of Echoes. Her voice, carried on harmonics woven into the planet's own comnet, reached every Concord world. "We are not what we were," she began. "We were broken. We were scattered. We were deemed unworthy by those who believed themselves divine." She looked out at the crowd, some in old armor, some in robes, many in the uniforms of new worlds yet unnamed. But from ruin, we did not wither. We became. Cheers erupted. Not loud, not wild, just solid, a wall of sound that wrapped around the world. Kalen raised her hand, quieting them. "This is not a coronation. This is not the birth of a new empire. This is the moment we stop surviving and start shaping. Not alone, not as conquerors, but together. Under Ash, we found fire. In fire, we found truth. And through truth, we ascend." In the quiet that followed, a child, barely 10, stepped forward from the crowd. Half Lorithian, half human, wearing a crown of woven tetch filament and dried Terran herbs. They carried a flame. Kalen knelt, and when the child handed it to her, she held it high, not as a queen, but as a keeper. The Ash Concord had risen, not to rule the stars, but to illuminate them,